Please welcome your host for this evening, Dr. Lindsay Hoffman.
Hello, thank you, and welcome to National Agenda 2021. This is our 11th year of running the program, and we've got audience members in the theater, but we also have quite a few people who are watching virtually, so thank you for being here. We're here thanks to the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication, with support from the Office of the Provost, as well as the College of Arts and Sciences and the Division for Student Life. First, I want to state that I and our guests tonight will be 6 feet apart, so we are, according to UD policy, we're removing our masks for the conversation, so you can also understand what we're saying a little bit more clearly. This year's theme is, as you've been seeing on the intro, is Reflecting America. How is this era of historic political divides, social movements, and economic upheavals, fueled by the pandemic and politics, redefining who we are as Americans? We have access to more information than ever before, but it seems like we can't agree on basic facts, much less hear divergent viewpoints. How are Americans staying engaged with politics and their communities in such stressful times? We'll explore these questions this semester from journalists to activists to artists. And tonight, one of those journalists will be joining us. We will be inviting audience participation tonight, both in the theater and online. To ask a question here in the theater, you'll see we have 2 microphones set up. 2 microphones set up at the front. When I open it up for Q&A about 8:30 p.m., simply raise your hand and I will ask for our volunteer mic marshals, who are students in my class. Thank you to my students who are volunteering, to lead you to the microphone and then lead you back to your seat. This is to engage with COVID protocols. To submit a question online, you can type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom. I'm assuming this is the bottom of your screen. At the bottom of your Zoom window, and it may be selected during our Q&A at the end of the talk. So tonight, I'm introducing Eric Michael Garcia. He's a senior DC correspondent at The Independent and the author of the recently published We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation, which will be available for sale, signed copies after the event in the lobby. Most of his work is focused on American politics and disability rights, as well as the intersection between the two. Garcia says he hopes to change the dialogue around autism and the language used to depict those with disabilities. He brings his personal experience as a person with autism to his reporting and stresses that autism is not something that needs to be cured or fixed, but instead is part of his identity. Please join me in giving a big blue hen welcome to Eric Garcia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? All right, perfect. Well, I truly appreciate, thank you to Dr. Hoffman, thank you to the entire university, thank you to the students who I spoke with earlier today, and thank you to everybody watching in the theater today and at home. It is a true honor and pleasure and privilege, and I actually had to take kind of a double take when I got off the Amtrak today and I saw, oh, it's named after President Biden. I can't really leave Washington even when I want to.
Yes, this is the home of Joe Biden, for sure. I also want to thank the many folks joining us online tonight. We have people from Massachusetts to Florida to Ohio. Hello to my mother-in-law, and all over the country. Thank you for being here. So let's talk first about your book.
Sure.
We're Not Broken.
Yeah.
So congratulations on getting the book published.
Thank you.
First of all, you use the terms neuroatypical and neurotypical throughout the book. Can you help our audience understand what those terms mean, as well as your thoughts around how we describe autistic people in terms of high and low functioning? So kind of a little bit of a premise of your book.
Sure, definitely. So for those who don't know, for the uninitiated, neurotypicals are essentially people who, it's not just non-autistic people, it is people with whose brains function in the way that we have often considered normal, which is to say people without conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and Tourette syndrome, dyspraxia, and other conditions. So neurotypical essentially means that. Neuroatypical means that these are the types of ways that people's brains function that have for too often not been considered normal, or whose brain types have often been considered deviations from the norm. And the term neurodiversity is often used to talk about the concept of accepting autistic people, but really neurodiversity is for all neuroatypical types, whether it's autism, ADHD, Tourette syndrome, dyspraxia, which I also have ADHD, and it also applies to people with dyscalculia. And
Can you describe what the dyspraxia and the other?
Dyspraxia is for motor skills, and dyscalculia, I believe, is for numbers as well, as well as dyslexia. So these are the types of neurotypes, and basically neurodiversity argues that instead of trying to change these neurotypes, rather what should happen is we should be more adaptable. We should be accepting of them and accommodating toward them. In terms of functioning and functioning labels, how many people here in the audience have heard of the concepts of high functioning and low functioning autism?
Oh, that's just about everybody in the room.
Basically, yeah. So a lot of people who are probably here watching, how many of you guys probably, I'm going to ask another question, how many of you would consider me high functioning?
They've just gotten to know you.
Yes, they've just gotten to know me. Yes, some of the people have also been in your class who we spoke to earlier, so they might know why I'm not a fan of the term. But the reason why I'm not a fan of the terms high functioning and low functioning is that for a lot of people, you might think of me as high functioning. I am speaking on stage today. I'm speaking. I have a job, but I think that isn't the whole of myself. To call someone high functioning is to erase the legitimate difficulties that they have, or the legitimate challenges that they have. I think a lot of times, a lot of people think of autistic people like myself, and they think, oh, well, your autism helps you. But what people don't realize is that I still am really sensitive to noise and overwhelming light and sound. Oftentimes, I still can be completely overwhelmed. I can still have difficulty reading social cues. I can have a lot of trouble info dumping. So tonight, if I info dump a little too much, please stop me. And a lot of times we have difficulty with a lot of times oftentimes I still stim, and that's my way of coping and dealing with sensory processing around the world.
And can you describe that term too?
Stim is self-stimulatory behavior, which is basically stimulating yourself. So usually if you see me playing with my shoelaces tonight, I have my keys in my pocket, but I'm trying not to jingle too much. But it's just a way for me to deal with sensory processing, because even when I'm in an adaptable environment, I still need to soothe myself. And being on a place with bright lights, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. Right now it's fine, but I tend to think that's not I don't think it's a really good description. And conversely, I think a lot of people, when they say, oh, well, you're nothing like my child is extremely low functioning, that sets the bar a little too low it sets the expectations criminally low for autistic people. And oftentimes what it does is that creates an incentive for us not to give them their full rights. It's an incentive to put them in institutions. It's an incentive to administer pretty draconian treatments like using shock therapy on autistic people, or it's an argument for paying them below the minimum wage.
Which shock therapy, from your book, up until 2020, was still considered a normal treatment?
Yeah, and in a district court, I believe it was a district court, just found that the FDA's ruling that using shock therapy for autistic people can still be administered. So it's still an ongoing legal dispute. Just because the FDA put a ruling on it doesn't mean that it's still not over. But I think that what it does is that it's used as a rationale to do some pretty horrible things against autistic people. And also what it does is it sets the expectations so low. Imagine being told your whole life that you're low functioning, and it sets the expectation so low that it basically creates its incentive to not allocate a lot of resources or not put a lot of faith in you, or not even if you can't become a computer programmer or things like that, it says we're not going to spend that much money on your education or your housing or your home care or any of that. So I tend to prefer the terms high support needs and low support needs, because whereas functioning labels like high functioning and low functioning are based on how neurotypical people see autistic people, terms like high support needs and low support needs are based on what autistic people need.
Okay, so it's less about how they're functioning, more about what they need?
More about, because functioning labels tend to be, you don't know how someone can function. Just because someone can't speak doesn't mean that they can't live a good life. Just because they can't speak doesn't mean that they can't go to school. Or just because they can't speak doesn't mean that they can't be loving and caring and kind and a good person. And similarly, just because someone can speak doesn't mean that they don't need a home care aide when they go home. Just because someone can hold a job doesn't mean that they don't deal with that they don't occasionally have meltdowns. So these terms like functioning labels don't really describe. They really flatten the experiences of autistic people.
Well, one thing you write about in your book is that the anti-vaccine movement has infected politics.
Yes.
Can you describe the history of the false association between vaccines and autism?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been something that's been around since like around the 1990s, but it really took shape in 1998. There had been studies about that, potentially linking the two for a while, but Andrew Wakefield in 1988, he was a British physician, and I believe the Royal Free Hospital in London put out a study in The Lancet saying that there was a connection between autism and he basically, in the actual study, he didn't really say it, but during his press conferences, he talked about this idea of leaky gut syndrome, which said that the MMR vaccines, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, causes chemicals to leak out of the intestines, go into the brainstem, and autism. Now, the thing of it was that, and he was very careful in his actual peer-reviewed study, but it turns out that later on he was lying, and he was researching children. He was being paid by lawyers who were suing the vaccine companies. I believe that was what happened. And basically he lost his medical license, and plenty of people disputed his research studies, and eventually the Lancet study was retracted in 2010. But that was in 1998 when it came out, and then it happened in 2010. In the intervening years, it became this meme, and it took, how many people are familiar with Jenny McCarthy and her whole BS campaign about vaccines and autism? She got it from Andrew Wakefield, her and Jim Carrey. And of course, she, discussed it on Oprah Winfrey, which gave it an even bigger platform, because had she just been a normal celebrity who put out crank theories. Kyrie Irving's a flat earther, but we don't take Kyrie Irving seriously. But Oprah Winfrey put it on daytime television, and it scared the hell out of plenty of parents. And then on top of that, what happened is it wasn't just pop culture that was starting to do it. It was also our policymakers. So in 2000, Andrew Wakefield testified before Congress about the link between vaccines and autism. And it got plenty of Democrats and Republicans, asked him about the link, and there were only a few people who said that that this is a very, very dangerous game that we're playing, and it might lead to fewer vaccination rates. But so, of course, we found out that that was not true. We found out that Andrew Wakefield, like I said, he was being paid by lawyers who were suing, so he obviously had a financial incentive. But think about that. That was for 12 years. This entered the zeitgeist. Now there are people in between, intervening, disputing it, but he still had that imprimatur, and it took root in the body politic in both the United Kingdom and the United States. And I don't think you would have the current hesitancy about vaccines with COVID-19 had there not been that initial moral panic about autism and vaccines in the 1990s and the 2000s. I often say that the autism panic of the 1990s and the 2000s is to the COVID vaccine pandemic what The Hobbit is to the Lord of the Rings. So I don't know, have people here read The Lord of the Rings or watched Lord of the Rings? But one leads to the other, and there wouldn't have been those seeds sown of doubt. But I think more than that, there's another reason why I have a bone to pick with anti-vaxxers. Yes, they're public health threats, but more than that, they're essentially arguing that it is better to be dead from measles than it is to be autistic. And that's the message that they're sending. And it's saying that autism is essentially is worse than a death sentence. And that is rooted in that's rooted in this idea that autism is a malady, that it's something to be avoided, and that if you vaccinate your kid and they get autism, you failed as a parent, or you failed as a doctor, or a pediatrician, or a practitioner.
Even though that link is false.
Totally false. But it created that, it sowed that seed, and we now you can't cut down that tree because the roots there.
Well, I'm curious, is the anti-vax movement a problem for more individualistic countries like the USA compared with other nations? Do we see these kind of patterns worldwide?
I can't speak too much for that, but I know that there's, countries like Israel have done better with vaccinations. There's some difficulties with accessing the vaccine in places like Canada, and of course places like Brazil's Bolsonaro. I believe Bolsonaro is, not that too keen on vaccines in Brazil, but I can't speak too much to that. But I think that the United States, it's really interesting because on one end, our individualistic, our image is ruggedly individual, prevents us from adopting ideas like herd immunity. But on the other end, it oddly enough, almost kind of helps autistic people in other ways because it's why places like Texas are the first places to pass supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship, which is to say that instead of having a guardian, disabled people can have a consortium of people like their families or loved ones who help them make decisions, but ultimately they make the decision. So oddly enough, and then also it's one of the reasons why we are probably better in home care than a few other developed nations for disabled people because of our image as ruggedly individuals. Sometimes it means that we don't spend a lot of money on public health or accommodations or making places adaptable or accessible or spending enough on social welfare. On the other end, sometimes it makes us, I think, more willing to focus on things like home care or focus on things like individual rights for individual people with disabilities.
Well, let's lighten the mood a little bit. This is a tweet that you posted back in July. As far as I can tell, you haven't yet made the New York Times bestseller list. But if you do, what tattoo will you get?
Okay. So I've promised with my mom we're going to get matching neurodiversity tattoos with the infinity symbol in a rainbow because that's the symbol. That's the symbol. That's the official symbol, I think, of the neurodiversity movement. So possibly doing that.
Fascinating.
Or I've half joked. Anybody know the right-wing cartoonist Ben Garrison? Like, I see some hands. Like, he drew this one really outrageous cartoon about autism being like a tiger and with like syringe claws. So I've half joked that like I'd want to get an autism tiger tattoo, just like kind of like how the Democratic Andrew Jackson was called a jackass, and then he made the donkey the mascot of the Democratic Party. I kind of want autistic people to adopt the embrace the tiger. Yeah.
So I also bring in students' questions from my class. You talked to my class earlier today and over dinner. Jordan wants to know, in what ways do you believe being on the spectrum has aided you in your career? You had an article that preceded this book in 2015 in The Atlantic magazine, and you mentioned your obsessive nature regarding politics, helping to start your career as an intern. In what ways does it help you today?
Absolutely helps. So, I think it's interesting because I don't think that it's not like I'm better than any other journalist. It's just that being autistic means that I'm better at some things that journalists do, and I have deficiencies that I need to work on that other journalists might be more adept at. So some other journalists might be more adept at, having those after-work cocktails with, inside sources on Capitol Hill or the White House or something like that.
Having the Rolodex.
Yeah, having the Rolodex of people that they call regularly. But I think that's sometimes my obsessive, and I think that sometimes, I'm still kind of a bag of nerves before I pick up the phone, and I need to have 30 minutes to unwind after I get off the phone with someone before I can pick up the phone next time, and that's okay. But in the same respect, I think that kind of obsessive nature is why sometimes when I'm bored on a Friday night, what do? I go through FEC spreadsheets because there's stories in there about who's giving money to who and how much money are some people raising. Also, I think that sometimes I think that because social cues and social niceties are kind of a foreign language to me as an autistic person, I don't have a lot of regard when I see social niceties being used as a shield for BSing or giving me a straight answer. So sometimes I'll be really, really blunt and direct, and I won't relent until I actually get a question. Sometimes that gets me in trouble. I think in 2016, I accidentally followed a U.S. senator into the men's room. I didn't realize that you weren't supposed to do that. Then later, I think we all saw that earlier this week with Kirsten Sinema, but I didn't realize that on the Capitol that they said, look, if you do this again, you're going to lose your Capitol Press Pass. But I was mortified after that. But after that I learned, okay, you can't follow someone in the men's room, but I still try to, if someone, but at the same time, I think that, in other ways, I still, that spirit of not wanting to relent until I get an actual answer persists, and that's why I think I'm kind of driven, and also why I can be really obsessive when it comes down to looking at trends that other people did. So for example, last year I was arguing, I think ever since Bernie Sanders won Nevada, that Joe Biden was underperforming with Latinos, and I kept on saying that, and then what happened on election night? Trump vastly improved with Latino voters in South Florida and South Texas, but not just South Florida and South Texas. He improved with Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia. He improved with Mexican Americans in Compton. He improved in, basically even places like the Bronx and Queens, he improved with Latino voters. So sometimes, being obsessive about that. Sometimes I get it wrong. Other times though, but I can be a dog with a chew toy and just completely just zero in on something until it gets the national attention. And I'm like, see, I was right about that.
Well, I do want to come back to Latino voters, because that's definitely
Absolutely.
something that you have written about. But I wanted to say something you described in your book, the first time you saw an autistic person in the news in 2007. Can you describe what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, I think I can describe it, and I can talk about a positive experience and a negative experience, which I talk about in the book. First time I saw an autistic person on the news was when Sanjay Gupta was interviewing the late Mel Baggs, who died in 2020, I believe. May their memory be a blessing, and God rest their soul. But I remember it was fascinating because, again, to the point about high functioning and low functioning, Mel Baggs was a non-speaking autistic person, and someone who many people thought was low functioning. But what's funny is I remember I watched their interview with Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN, and I just couldn't look away. And I remember my mom saying, "Could you please change the channel? It reminds me a lot of the bad experiences, when you were being bullied." But I was like, it wasn't that I didn't want to change the channel, it was just that I couldn't, because I was just I couldn't look away, because it was finally I was seeing somebody who looked like me. And again, people think that I'm very different from a quote-unquote low-functioning autistic person, but here there was this gap, across the country. We look very different in a lot of ways, but for the first time in my life, I saw somebody who moved in the world the way that I did, and reacted and responded to people the way that I did, and had the same kind of reaction that people did reacted the same way to people that I did. And it was a totally surreal experience. It was something that I had never seen portrayed in real life before. And that was on CNN. And then conversely, I think
You almost described it as if you've been speaking a foreign language.
yeah, exactly.
Someone is speaking the same language.
Yeah, it was like I'd been living in, I'd been an immigrant in a foreign country my whole life, and then finally I was seeing somebody speak the mother tongue. And when Mel Baggs died, I finally watched their video in my language, which I'd never watched, and I was overcome with emotions watching their video. I recommend, if you don't read my book, please watch Mel Baggs' in my language. And then conversely, I think that a negative experience, I think it was either that same night or the night after, Larry King interviewed Jenny McCarthy. So right there, right then, on the same network, within 24 hours, this is in 2007, you had a very, very positive portrayal, an empowering portrayal of autism, and you had a very negative and very toxic and very poisonous and false portrayal of autism within a span of 24 hours or 48 hours. I don't even remember. But this was in 2007. So it showed, in hindsight, I think that it kind of is a testament to the fact that I'm a journalist now, that even when I was a teenager, I understood the power of media, because I remember after I saw that, I asked my mom, I was like, was I vaccinated when you guys thought I was autistic? She's like, what are you talking about? Because she'd never heard of that. So that's an example of how media can be constructive and destructive.
Well, you talk about representations in media, and you mentioned in the book and in the classroom today the show Atypical that is on Netflix. I don't know if anyone has seen this show. And you argued that those portrayals have severe consequences for autistic people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that, for example, one of the biggest examples is that the main character, Sam, in it is not portrayed by an autistic actor. So already then you're getting a second-hand idea of what autism looks like. It's not somebody who's autistic. And, in the year of our Lord 2021, it's not the era of Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, which came out in 1988. Like, you can cast autistic people. And on top of that, I think that a lot of times it excused some of Sam's poor behavior toward women as, oh, well, he's autistic, like when he locked his girlfriend in a closet. Like, that's just being rude toward women. That's just being kind of abusive toward women. But it uses it as, oh, ha.
So it's kind of vilifying autism as
or it's almost excusing bad behavior. And I think that, like, as I frequently said, when Asperger's syndrome before the DSM changed, and now it's, Asperger's syndrome is under autism spectrum disorder, I used to say, Asperger's syndrome only has one S, it's up to you to add the second one. But I think that it leads it to excusing bad behavior, or almost or creating a model of, okay, this is acceptable behavior because they're autistic, and then of course that being in the real world, obviously that's not how the real world works. Also, I think that it's just it's a very, very flat portrayal. Like, I didn't see myself in the portrayal of autism, and it should be about someone who's like me, a quote-unquote high-functioning, or as they would call high-functioning version. It was only until the second season got better. They cast some autistic people in his support group or whatever, so that was fine, and they included some autistic people of color. But I just don't like the idea. I think I understand that there are autistic white people and autistic males, but I think for so long the template has been of autistic white males who can't get a girlfriend, and the autistic experience is so much larger than that and so much richer than that, and we overlook a lot of other autistic people. There are other great portrayals of autism in movies, like the Pixar short Loop, are fantastic, but that it doesn't do it for me. No.
That's a really interesting perspective. I'm going to jump to another tweet. I'm a little bit of a Twitter stalker. So here's a tweet of yours from the summer with an interaction with Matt Gaetz. First of all, tell us, what is it like to be on the ground with politicians as an autistic person, someone who might be interacting with you in an aggressive way, or in giving you social cues that are like, leave me alone, don't talk to me. What is that like?
So I think sometimes it's one of those things where you might not always read the cues. Always, I think in my article in National Journal, I talk about the time when I shouted over the dais at a committee hearing. I asked Orrin Hatch a question because I didn't realize you couldn't yell over the dais to ask a question. So sometimes that happens, and then security guard said, "Look, if you do that again, you're gonna get arrested, or you'll get thrown out, or I forget what." But then I got a little shook up, and I had to okay, decompress. Okay, it's gonna be okay. Other times I think that when you are seeing so many people, especially when I was a young reporter and I was seeing a lot of these people who I'd seen on TV, I thought that, oh, these guys are invincible, they're not going to want to take my questions, they're not going to want to listen to me, so I shouldn't even bother, or I would just get overwhelmed and I would freeze up, and I would just forget what I was going to ask. But then I think now I have less of a regard, or now it's kind of okay, I'm here to do a job, and these are the people who I'm here to question and ask. And sometimes it's so this is the context for this is up for a long time for a few months after after vaccinations started rolling out, the mask mandate on the House of Representatives was repealed, which you no longer had to wear a mask, and if you wore a mask, because for a while if you didn't wear a mask on the Hill, you would on the House floor, you'd get fined. So I saw Matt Gaetz come out the day that they brought back, the week that Nancy Pelosi brought back the mask mandate, and he was not wearing a mask. So I asked him, I was like, "What do you think about the mask mandate coming back?" Because I saw him walking out of the House, out of the metal detectors that were put in place after the January 6th riot. I was like, "What do you think of this mask mandate?" He says, "I'm against it." And I was like, so I just asked him, I said, "Are you vaccinated?" And then he just looks at me. No, he doesn't even look at me, and he's like, "That's a very nosy question." And this was the week after I had asked him about the Jan 6 Commission, Select Committee, and I said, Eric Garcia, the Independent, he says, "You guys aren't a legitimate news organization." And for someone like Matt Gaetz, at some point you realize, okay, this is kayfabe. This is, for those of you who aren't fans of WWE wrestling, kayfabe is show. play.
Thank you. I did not know that.
This is like he's doing it for kabuki theater. He's doing it to be histrionic. But then in that case, when you're with Matt Gaetz, it's like, look, no, that's not a nosy question. Asking if you're vaccinated when you're going unmasked on the House floor, you're a public servant. You have to set an example, especially in a state like Florida, where at the time hospitalization rates were skyrocketing. He's a Republican politician, and Republicans listen to you. So it's important for you to answer that question. So.
I'm going to alert the booth back there. But the remote doesn't seem to be working, so I'd like to move to the next slide. I don't know if you can do that from back there. And actually, I'm going to ask you to move to the next slide. Thank you. This was, I thought, a really interesting tweet about what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, and that you were in the dining hall. I
was in the basement. It's in the basement of the House.
The basement of the House. And you hear other police officers coming up and thanking that officer who testified famously before Congress several months ago. If I can ask you, where were you on January 6th, and what was your interpretation of what happened?
Yeah, so the interesting thing to me was that I was at, I live pretty far from the Capitol. I live near the White House, which is like on the other side. Washington, D.C., for those who don't know, it's divided into southeast, northeast, southwest, and northwest. So Capitol's on the southeast and the northeast side of D.C. I live in the northwest side, but I used to live in northeast for a long time. So what's interesting is I was staying at this hotel where a lot of Trump protests, where a lot of people who would join the Stop the Steal rally were going to be, and like on that Monday, I believe it was a Monday, I went to go grocery shopping, and I see that they were staying at this hotel, and some of them were smoking cigarettes, and I see some of them have like MAGA equipment, things like that. And I was thinking, and there had been confrontations with police a few times, because Jan 6, for those who don't remember, that wasn't the only time that they'd come to DC. They'd like set fire to a church the time before, or like there had been some confrontations on my street corner, so like when I saw them, and like when I went grocery shopping, I kind of clutched my bag, like oddly enough, I felt like I clutched my bags, and then I thought to myself, wait, am I being that kind of same condescending kind of beltway type that I hate, who like clutches his bags in the same way that white women might clutch their purse when they see me as a big Mexican dude? I was like, I probably shouldn't be that judgmental. And then, these guys, they had like Trump hats or Trump shirts, and they were smoking cigarettes, and they were like middle-aged and, white. And then later on, like the next day when I saw the riot on the Hill, and at first, like, I started seeing them pushing in, and I remember thinking, this isn't going to be good. And then, like, I saw that, and I was incidentally enough, I was on deadline for another piece, and like, I think I told I still had to finish that piece, but like, incidentally told my editor, I was like, we're kind of having an insurrection here, and then, like, I remember just being horrified. They put a curfew in place, and like, I was tempted to go down to the Capitol and like just report, but at the time I was a freelancer, so I couldn't get somebody to commission things like that. But I was tempted to go out there and write something, and just talk to the rioters or be there. But then they put a curfew in place, and I wasn't screwing with that. So, but then what's interesting is that the day of the riot, my dad texted me, and he said,
and your dad's conservative?
My dad's a Republican. My dad is a Trump voting, Fox News loving, right-wing Republican, and I love him very much. But he texted me, he's like, hey, mijo, be safe. Mijo, for those who don't know in Spanish, is my son. And then and I said, Dad, I'm home, I'm gonna be okay. I promise I'll be okay. Then within like 24 hours, my dad sent me like a meme online saying that this was like Antifa, or like this was meant to discredit the president. I love my father more than I love anybody. He's the reason, the way I got into politics was watching Fox News with my dad, and watching conservative talk radio with my dad, which I'm sure he sometimes wonders what the hell happened with me. But I got really cross with him. I said, Dad, no, these people were across the street from me. These weren't liberals pretending to be Trump supporters. This wasn't a psyop or things like that. I was like, these people came to my city. and they raided my city. And like, I remember being really shook up about it. And like, it wasn't until like I called my mom that like I started laughing, like just because I was so nervous. And she says, I understand why you're laughing, because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. But like, yeah, it really, because like I'd been a reporter, I wasn't a Hill reporter that day, but like seeing those corridors and things like that, I'd been through those halls, and sometimes when I go through those halls on the Hill now, I'm like, oh yeah, this is where I've seen, where I saw some of that footage. And I didn't, that wasn't on the tweet there, and I didn't tweet about it. But like a few days later, I saw Officer Eugene Goodman. For those who, I don't know if you remember, he was the one who told Mitt Romney like go the other way, and he like showed the rioters the other way. He directed the rioters to another way, which saved members of Congress' lives. And like I didn't say anything. I just said, look, we were in an elevator, and I just said, thank you very much for what you did. I just didn't want to make a big deal, because he's a cop. He's trying to do his job just like I'm trying to do my job, and I'm sure he doesn't want the accolades that much. He doesn't want to be, stick out like a sore thumb. But like I just told him, I said, look, just thank you for doing that, And I told my mom, and she's just like, he's so brave, and just she was happy that he's still on the force.
So we share something in common, which is having parents who, one parent is on one side ideologically, one parent is on the other side ideologically. How do you manage to maintain a good relationship with both parents, even, and like we both joke that they're of course divorced.
Yeah.
But how do you manage to maintain a kind of a good sense of civil dialogue, a sense of relationship, even if you disagree with maybe one of your parents?
My dad, when I took him to visit Washington, D.C., when he came to visit me in 2019, like we were walking to the Capitol, we passed by CNN's building, and then he was just like, fake news, or like he was joking about that. Like I remember he said something about CNN's fake news. Might have been when we were there, or might have been afterward, but like he said, CNN's fake news, and then like when I got my job at the Washington Post, he said, well, they make things up about our president, mijo. And I remember thinking, not really, no. Like, but I think that what I've come to recognize is that my dad's a Republican, he's conservative, and like for those who are surprised that like a Mexican American man could vote for Donald Trump, don't be surprised. Like Latinos have been voting for Republicans for decades. Ronald Reagan, George Bush, the second George Bush, and Donald Trump. Democrats need to learn how to do better with that, and not take Latino voters for granted. But I think the thing that we do is I think that, especially as he's seen me work as a journalist, and especially after he read that piece that I wrote about him and wrote about Latino men, I think that he's recognized that I do my homework, I do my due diligence, and I think that because I grew up in a conservative environment, my mom was a Republican, was very conservative until the Iraq War, and when she became a Democrat, she voted for Obama. I think that because I grew up in that kind of conservative Christian household, they recognize that like I'm not coming from a point of ignorance, or that I'm not coming from a place of malice, that like I understand these communities. And I think with my dad, I've come to recognize that even if he may think that like my job is a bunch of hooey, he recognizes that I do hard work, and that I come from an honest place, and that if you read in my writing about him, I don't really challenge him on anything. I don't say like, oh well, that's not true. I listen to him, and I let him say his stuff, because I recognize as a Republican, as my dad, he's important to listen to, but also about half of our country voted for Donald Trump. So I need to understand who these voters are. My dad isn't, because for every one of those guys who broke into the Capitol, there are plenty of others who didn't break into the Capitol, but who still voted for Donald Trump because of the tax cuts or because of the judges or things like that. And it's important to understand them, just as it's important to understand the guys who rioted on January 6th. In the same respect, I think it's also important because, I think sometimes I can get too stuck in the Beltway. Mm-hmm. Or because I only know a few people, I can count on one hand the amount of Republicans I know who voted for Donald Trump. The funny thing is when I get drinks with a Republican consultant, they tell me, hey, I didn't vote for Trump. And then I see on Twitter or on CNN or whatever, I see them defending Trump, and I'm just like, you jellyfish, But I almost don't, I respect the people who stood with Trump day one, or who were like, yeah, Trump's my guy. I like that we're going to build the wall and we're going to make America great again. And I respect, because at least you have a belief. But if you're just doing it, if you didn't vote for him and you're just doing this because you want a job, then you don't care about anything. You just care about your own social status, and paid a price. I think I only know like 3 or 4 actual Republicans I know who voted for Donald Trump, like personally. But I think that so many times the only conservatives you see on like MSNBC or CNN are those never Trump conservatives, but they represent only like 10% of all Republicans, and they all live in Northern Virginia. So it's important for me to talk with my dad and say like, hey Dad, what do you think of, just like 2 weeks ago, I texted him, I was like, what do you think of Tim Scott? Because I had interviewed Tim Scott a few times, who is the only black Republican senator, he's from South Carolina, and I think he has a bright future in the GOP, but like I was like, what do you think of him? He's like, I like him. And I said, yeah, I've interviewed him. And like other times I've asked, but then also I've been like, hey Dad, what do you think of Nikki Haley, who was Trump's ambassador to the UN? And it's kind of been wishy-washy on Trump, and then he's just like, oh, she's a traitor, she's just as bad as Liz Cheney. So it's important for me to do that. And then similarly, the thing with my mom's a Democrat. And what's funny is that I should have known that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee, because I think that a lot of people in the press, we were very disconnected, because I thought for a long time, oh, Joe Biden's old news, there's going to be a lot of other candidates who are running. But my mom liked Joe Biden from the beginning. Then she liked Kamala Harris for a little bit. Then she liked Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg for a little bit. She went back and forth. If you remember, in like the summer of 2019, a lot of people were saying Elizabeth Warren might be the nominee, and things like that. But like my mom never really warmed up to her. She said she's all right, but she's like, but nobody on The View likes her. That's where my mom watches a lot of times. And like people may make fun of The View, but like a lot of women watch it. And Obama was the first president to go on daytime television, and he chose that show. So like a lot of people watch it. But and I should have in hindsight. And then come Super Tuesday, she made the decision. I'm voting for Joe Biden because Harris had already dropped out. Pete had already dropped out, and Amy Klobuchar had. And then incidentally enough, but a lot of my younger cousins who were also Latino, they were almost all of them were for Bernie Sanders, whereas like a lot of the people in my family who were Democrats who were over 40, they were all in on Joe Biden. That should have told me that Biden was going to be the nominee, more than my esteemed, I'm, a sophisticated political reporter. Sometimes that's the better, sometimes, talk to your, if you think you're too disconnected about Democratic or Republican politics, talk to your mom, talk to your dad, or talk to, normal. I think that sometimes we focus too much on the diners in Iowa and not enough on the barbershops in Columbia, South Carolina, or the Pentecostal iglesias in Southern California, or
Chester County, Pennsylvania.
or Chester County, Pennsylvania, or somewhere like that. Yeah, those are the swing voters, and those are the primary voters that we should be focusing on. Yeah.
Well, I like the way you put it earlier today. Is it's you think of your dad sometimes as like a focus group of one.
Yeah.
And it's a way to be curious about people who you might disagree with, but also just come in with an intellectual curiosity, like, I'd want to know why you think that way.
Yeah.
And it can be really fascinating.
Yeah, because I remember I was thinking because for the longest time I've said, I remember for a while thinking that, because I know that Senator Tom Cotton is thinking about running for president. And I thought, he checks all the right boxes, but he doesn't seem charismatic enough to me. So I asked my dad, what do you think of Tom Cotton? He says, I'll tell you what, mijo, I think the best president we have in our lifetime one day might be Tom Cotton. I was like, oh, I hadn't thought that, I was like, that kind of checks that off for me. I guess he really appeals to a lot of conservative voters, and same deal with Ron DeSantis. Mm-hmm. I need to ask my dad, I'll ask him sometime soon, what he thinks does he think Trump should run again in 2024? But I mean, that was really important, and that showed me that, hey, maybe my preconceived notions about Tom Cotton were wrong, and maybe I'm sleeping on him. And in the same way, I've talked with my mom, and she's been really impressed with Senator Raphael Warnock, and she's been really impressed with a lot of, she's been kind of disappointed with Kamala Harris, but she kind of wants Joe Biden to do better on things like immigration and people at the border, because she thinks that, they haven't been adequately treated. So, it's important to talk to these people. It's important to talk to people outside the Beltway, and it's important to talk to people, for you guys as students, it's important for you guys to get outside the community and get outside the university bubble and talk with people who maybe aren't the same as you. If not to come to an agreement, but to at least understand that we live in this country together, and we're kind of doomed if we don't live together. And we're living in a very, very divided time. I think probably as divided a time as in the 1960s, and it's important for us to talk with each other.
Well, I have so many more topics I want to talk to you about, but before we move on, I think I do want to bring up, you had an article that you wrote for the Daily Beast called "What It Feels Like to Be an Autistic Person of Color in the Eyes of the Police."
Yeah.
And you talked about what it was like to see the 2016 shooting of Charles Kinsey, who was black and was a behavioral aide of a Latino autistic man who had wandered away from the home where he was being cared for. Fortunately, Kinsey survived, but you say you were rattled when you heard the cops say they hadn't meant to shoot the black man, but the autistic one.
Yeah. Yeah, that was because the person whose name is Arnaldo Rios Soto. There's a great podcast by Audrey Quinn about that whole shooting. I think it's called After Effects or something like that. Just look up Audrey Quinn podcast and you'll find it. And, it was disturbing because if you remember, this was during, I think this was when Black Lives Matter was getting into the public consciousness, and the idea that police can shoot unarmed black men was really becoming, this was on video if you remember. And that's not to say that this didn't, which is to say that this has happened multiple times before, but it just wasn't on video. But I think that the fact that the police thought it would be acceptable or that they would get off if they said, "Oh, we were aiming for the autistic guy," and say it was almost as if saying, instead of the black guy, as if that was a reasonable excuse or that was a reasonable justification for opening fire. That showed me that to a lot of police, it showed that it said to me that police aren't equipped to handle autistic people, and it showed that autistic people of color might be more susceptible or more vulnerable. Because I'd known what it's like to be Latino in America for a long time. Ever since I was born, if you can't ignore my skin color, but I hadn't thought about how police will see your skin color or they'll see your temperament, they'll see all these things, but I don't have a name tag that says autistic, and nor do I want one. I want to be able to live freely and move freely, and all autistic people want to live freely and move freely, but that isn't the first thing a lot of people see when they see that police see when they first see it. They just see, a large Latino male, just like they did with Arnaldo Rios. He was sitting in the middle of the street, and he was with a toy truck, but people thought he had a gun. And the Mr. Kinsey was saying, he was yelling to police in the video, he only has a toy truck, and he was trying to soothe Arnaldo. And Arnaldo Rios has struggled immensely since then. He's cycled through a few places, and he's been traumatized, as anybody would be, and it shows. I think the ways that police are not equipped to handle dealing with autistic people. And personally, and this isn't even a knock on police, I just personally think this is too big of an order for police. And this is not and I think that it's asking too much of our police officers to have them deal with people having mental breakdowns or who are developmentally disabled, because that's not what police are there to be. They're there to protect and to serve. They're not equipped to handle people with developmental disabilities, even if they go through some kind of mandatory training. That's not why they got onto the force. And I have friends in law. I was in Boy Scouts, so some of my friends joined law enforcement. And I know police to be good people, and my scoutmasters, some of them were police officers. So I think that that's too big of an order, and I think that we should, more than teaching police how to deal with autistic people, we should find ways so that that's not the first resort we have, is calling police, because nobody is served by that. Police are ill-served by having to handle someone with a developmental disability, and the people who are developmentally disabled oftentimes can and have wound up dead or at least traumatized after these incidents. So it doesn't do anybody any good.
So skipping ahead here, I do want to talk about Latino voters.
Yeah.
So particularly you had an article about, in the Washington Post, why did Latino men shift towards Trump in 2020? But you also identified how Latino women differed from Latino men. So can you kind of give us a summary of what that argument was about and sort of what to expect maybe in this upcoming midterm election and presidential election?
Yeah, so what I should first preface by saying is that since that article came out, there's been more research from a group I interviewed, Equi's Research, and Stephanie Valencia, who's it's a Democratic group that focuses largely on Latinos. And what it showed was that while more Latino men voted for Trump, there was a bigger shift among Latinas. So what Ian Haney Lopez, who is a professor at Berkeley, found was that plenty of Latinas understood Trump's sexist remarks that they thought of as sexist as women. They took it as women, not as Latinas. So that might have resonated with them more. So while there may have been a bigger shift of Latinos moving left to right, there were still more Latino men who voted for Trump. But I think that it shows that, but I think one of the things that ECI study showed was that it showed that Trump didn't focus that much on immigration. He focused mostly on the economy. He focused largely on reopening businesses. These were things that resonated with Latino men. A lot of them who lost their jobs in the service industry or I should say specifically, and when I talk about Latino men, oftentimes it's non-college educated Latino men who are starting to vote in many ways like non-college educated white men. Trump improved with these voters, whereas college-educated Latinos oftentimes vote like college-educated whites, which would say they vote for Democrats. But I think that what you're seeing is you're starting to see educational polarization. I think that over time you're going to start seeing more and more non-college educated men and women start to vote more like non-college educated whites, which is to say they vote more Republican. That was the bigger divide in 2016 than even income levels, was education levels. And I think that Democrats, for the longest time, I think that they banked on the idea that, we can count on Latinos to vote for us because Trump is a racist. I mean, that's what they say. They think that Trump is a racist. Latinos will know this. They're never going to nominate someone like a Marco Rubio who's a Latino or things like that. They're going to vote for someone like Donald Trump. And we're going to let Trump do our work for us. But that's really political malpractice. You can't just expect people to vote for him because, as we saw, plenty of Latinos in South Florida, in Texas, and elsewhere, voted for Trump, liked his message about law enforcement, liked his message about oil, if you work in the oil fields of Texas, liked his message about police, and were turned off about arguments about defunding the police. So there are plenty of Latinos who find that argument very compelling, and Democrats need to find, maybe they don't need to give up their values, and they probably shouldn't, but they do need to find a way to better communicate those values. So like I was talking with, it didn't make that final piece, but a city councilor in Philadelphia who was Puerto Rican, she said that like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's plan on Puerto Rico was fantastic. She was a Democratic city councilwoman, but she said, but nobody knew about it. And meanwhile, Trump made inroads with Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia, in the neighborhoods of Philadelphia. So Democrats need to recognize that Latinos, I've said for a long time, I've said for the past few months that I think that Latino voters are going to be a lot for Republicans what white people are for Democrats, which is Democrats have not won a majority of white voters since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. But what they've learned is that they can pick off enough white voters, like maybe a quarter or a third or something like that, that they can make the difference. It used to be that they used to pick off white working class rural voters. Now they're focusing mostly on college-educated whites who live in suburbs or live in cities. And that usually makes the difference, as is the case with Joe Biden and John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. And I think in the same way, Republicans are learning, they may not necessarily need to win a majority of Latino voters, but if they win a majority of, say, non-college educated white men, or non-college educated Latino white men, Hispanic white men, or non-college educated, or like a half of non-college educated Hispanic women, that could very easily make the difference in a place like Texas, where Democrats want to be competitive. It can make a difference in places like Georgia or North Carolina or Nevada, in Senate races, in gubernatorial races, and even in presidential races if they play their cards right.
Fascinating. Let's, before we move it to questions, we'll move to questions in a few minutes. I'm curious, a question from one of my students in Raleigh talks about, in pursuing your career as a journalist in Washington, did you ever feel that you were discriminated against or disregarded because of your autism? And what would be your advice to those who are thinking about pursuing a similar career who have autism?
Okay, good question. So it's funny because I didn't disclose that I was autistic in the beginning of my career. I didn't want people to see me as the autistic reporter. I wanted to be judged on my merits. I didn't, and I worried that, checking that box when I was applying for jobs would, put me at a disadvantage. So I just didn't talk about it. And then the times when I did talk about it in job interviews, I never got a call back or things like that. Or like when I put it on job applications, when I was applying for part-time jobs in high school and college, I never got a call back. So I was just kind of like, okay, screw it. I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm not going to bring it up, because
So bringing it up was a barrier to getting
bring it. So usually like actually I don't know. It might have been, it might not have, because we don't know. Maybe I might not have been qualified for it. I don't know. But it ingrained in my mind, it's more trouble than it's worth. So I just thought, okay, I'm not going to do it. It probably, most likely it wasn't, but it became a placebo thing. But it wasn't until, I wrote that, it wasn't until I disclosed it when I was having trouble with a piece when I was working at MarketWatch that I disclosed it to a copy editor, and he's like, okay, we're going to work together and do that. But then later on, when I wrote that piece for National Journal, now I can't really hide it. That's the first thing now when you Google me, you're going to see this book, But now it's kind of one of those things where it's like, has it probably cost me some job opportunities? Probably. But I would never know, because the people who are not willing to hire an autistic person, they're not calling me. Whereas the people who are willing to hire an autistic person, or at least that's not a deciding factor or the determining factor to check my name off, they're at least willing to, they're going to find that when they Google my name, or they're going to find that when they see my writing and my past clips or things like that, and I'm sometimes including those clips when I'm applying for jobs. So that's just something. So I can't say whether it's been a benefit or a detriment, because I just really don't know. Even when I didn't get those jobs in the past, it might have very well been about autism. It might very well not have been. As far as the question about being autistic and being in the media, I think that first off, there's a question about whether you want to disclose. I can't really begrudge people who would or wouldn't want to disclose. I see both sides of it. But one of the things I would say is that if you want to disclose, if you're applying for a job, take a look at the leadership. Are there people of color there? Is the place wheelchair accessible? Is are there women in leadership? Are there people of color in leadership? Are there, is the man, because the staff writers and the staff editors and all of them, they might be diverse, but if the leadership is overwhelmingly white and male, or just overwhelmingly white, then it might not necessarily be a place where you feel safe and secure disclosing. As far as what I would say to a young reporter, as I would say a young reporter who wants to get into this business, I would just say, start finding a way to write every day. Find a beat that as I often tell young autistic people who want to get into the business, a beat is essentially a myopic interest, or a lot of people call autistic people's interests a special interest. I call them a focus interest, but a beat is basically a focus interest that pays you. So focus, if you care a lot about, if you're an autistic reporter and you feel that there's a gap, I don't know, in whatever it be, energy, let's just use that example. Write about it, and write about it in a way that there's that nobody else does, whether it's having a Substack, having a blog, tweeting regularly, freelancing for your local newspaper, or being a stringer, or cold calling or cold pitching editors and just saying, hey, I have this idea, and just starting somewhere. Is that just the same thing that I would say to everybody else, to any other student in journalism, start somewhere, try to write every day. And I would say the other thing is that this is a tough business. So I always tell any journalist and anybody who wants to study journalism, it's a tough job. I've been at places that have gotten where the print magazine is shut down. I've seen layoffs. I've left a job in the past. It's a tough job. So you always have to ask yourself every morning. You have to ask yourself, do I love the news part of the news business to deal with the business part of the news business? And the answer is yes. Then fine. And then if the answer is no, there are things that pay you way more than journalism. That'll make you much happier, and you'll see your family more. So go do those things. So.
All right, well, I'm going to ask Sarah and Trey, my two students who are going to help be I'm calling mic marshals, to come up to these two microphones. Sarah, looks like you're closer to this one. Trey, you're closer to that one. But as you're coming up, I wanted to ask another question. This is a series of tweets that you said, I made the mistake of reading the Facebook comments for my NPR interview. One parent said that my message may be fine for high-functioning autistic people, but somehow kids just stim or do these stimulating activities and make noises or throw plates all day, as if it's a bad thing. So what has been the reaction to your book from the larger autistic community?
I think the autistic community as a whole appreciates it. I may not be able to, I wasn't able to cover all the ground I wanted to cover, so that certainly means I didn't cover all the ground they wanted to cover, but I think autistic people as a whole have liked it. Even most parents, like I talk about this, like, never read the comments. Just like don't read the comments, especially on Facebook, which is just a cesspool. But I mean, yeah, in the same respect, even when parents have had negative reactions or have said that, oh, you erased my kid, I think I've had the obligation to say that I didn't erase. If you actually read my book, I actually profile non-speaking autistic people, and I talk about how they can live fulfilling lives and what are the ways that parents can best assist their kids and best assist them to ensure that they have a good life. And I refer them to a lot of people who probably have who are probably on better authorities about it. So there have been some people who haven't liked it, but I think mostly the reaction has been it's been pretty well received. I mean, I think that, obviously it's going to elicit strong emotions from people. They say, oh, well, you didn't discuss self-interest behavior. Well, I kind of did. I say that, we focus so much on stopping self-interest behavior, but we don't think about why autistic people do that or what triggers it. And that, again, focuses on us trying to cure the symptom, not the cause of it. But yeah, I mean, I expected there to be some pushback and some supreme dislike because it's a very heated issue, but for the most part, it's been fine.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that tattoo, so I'm hoping that the book does well. So that said, we are going to get some questions in. So for our online audience, let's get some questions in the online queue. I have a family member
on the spectrum.
What is the best way I can support them as they struggle making academic career choices while in college?
Oh, good question. Really good question. I think the best thing, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because, it seems like, there are places with good, disability services are really touch and go depending on the school you go to. I've always said, my services I got at community college before I went to UNC were just as good, if not better, than the services I got at UNC. And I probably got pretty good services at UNC, but the community college services I got were amazing at Chaffey College back in California. But I think the other thing to do is to put them in contact with their guidance counselor, put them in contact with, and then have their guidance counselor or have the disability services provider or whatever it might be at the college to contact and work with the faculty, only if they want to. Some students don't want to disclose, but if the student wants to disclose that they're autistic and get accommodations, do it in a way that doesn't embarrass them or make them feel ostracized in the larger classroom, and work with them in a way so that they can best struggle and succeed, so that they can best succeed and get past the struggles and difficulties. But the other thing that's important to remember is that a lot of autistic students say that their biggest challenges isn't the academic side of it, it's the social part of college. And there's a big reason why suicidal ideation among autistic students is higher than even, a lot of neurotypical students deal with suicidal ideation, but it's an even bigger, more prevalent problem for autistic people. But making sure that they have a community, making sure they have a support system. So I think that one of the big things, a big mistake a lot of autistic students have, and I say this because I made this mistake, is that they think that, oh, well, I can't ask for disability students is because by virtue of me being in college, I can't be that disabled. Well, no, those services exist because you're disabled and because we've accepted the idea in the law, and it's the law and it's your right, that yes, we should ensure that disabled people can go to college and succeed, and that's your right to do it. And you're not taking away from other people when you're asking for this. You're not taking away from another disabled student. You're getting what you deserve. And I think instilling in them that they deserve to have these services is an incredibly important thing. And then also making sure that you obviously can't force them to make friends or join groups, but ensuring that they do have some kind of support circle is really important, because college can be incredibly isolating, even if you're neurotypical, and even more so if you're autistic.
Well, and I should point out that the University of Delaware does have a Center for Disability Studies and a Spectrum Scholars Program. I don't know if Mary Ellen is still here, who runs this Spectrum Scholars Program. So there are universities that are really stepping up and helping students on the spectrum. Yeah,
I remember the first university I visited was the one university I visited. Somebody suggested I go to Marshall University in West Virginia, and again, showing how condescending and how ignorant I was like, I'm not going to West Virginia for anything, And then like I realized, A, it's a beautiful state. B, it's one of the first states that really prioritized autism and disability education. And it really taught me a lot when I visited there. And, I write about it in the book, so.
That's great. All right, I think we're ready to take some questions from in-house. Would anyone like to ask a question? Let's go way back here. Come over here to this microphone, please.
I feel like Sean Spicer. This is the biggest crowd, period, for a book author.
All right, we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Nicole. You talked about a lot of really important things, but I guess something that I really envied you talked about was your relationship with your dad and how open you talk with your differences and opinions politically. And I envy that because my dad refers to me as a disappointing snowflake. So I just was really cool to hear you talk about that. And I just was wondering, from a different perspective, if you have you told the students that they should go to their parents and speak if they want to learn more. If there's something you can suggest for parents that are not as accepting as yours are, or if you had to go over a hurdle like that or something?
Yeah, I think that the thing that my dad recognizes, I'm fortunate enough that my dad recognizes that like I think things through, and he recognizes because he's actually seen me be a reporter by me interviewing him. I think that he saw that like I'm not acting in bad faith, so that's not a luxury that you probably don't have as a reporter, right? You're not a journalist right now yet. If you want, we can talk later. But like, I think that the thing you could say is that, Dad, you come by your beliefs honestly. I think you come by your beliefs honestly. I came by my beliefs honestly. This is how I came to these conclusions. This is why I think the way that I think. And it doesn't mean that I love you any less. And I don't think that this doesn't mean that I think of you any less. It just means that we have severe disagreements, and these are, but I still respect, but I think also the other thing that you say is you want to know, how did you come to believe these things, Dad? Mm-hmm. Why do you believe what you believe? And I think that might be an inroad, because what you do is that if you ask him why he believes what he believes, then that might give you a space to say, this is why I believe what I believe. And if you could say, look, I know we're not going to get to, because I think a lot of times when people debate politics, they expect that to, and I think especially, conservatives tend to think that, okay, well, I'm going to show these godless liberals how immoral they are. And I think a lot of liberals think that, oh, well, if I just show them the right facts, then they'll change their mind. But I think that if you're coming from a place of not wanting them to change their mind, but at least them understanding why you think this way and why this is important to you, that might be a better way if you also come with them by saying, why do you believe what you believe, and why does this matter to you? And clearly you guys have something in common if you care that much about politics that it's become such a sticking point. Clearly there's something in common between you two. So I think that finding out why, or at least indulging him, might lead him to at least listening to you, if he doesn't accept you. And that's a whole other thing. So
Thank you so much.
thank you.
It's a great question.
Awesome question.
All right, do we have another Zoom question? Yes, we have another Zoom question is ready, and then we'll take a question from this side. Sarah, so you'll be next. All right, how can we increase voter participation among people with intellectual disabilities and or autism?
Oh, really good question. This last election was actually fantastic for people with disabilities because of the fact that so many autistic people who couldn't afford to leave their homes could vote from home. That was an incredible thing. We saw an increase in voter turnout among people with disabilities by something like 6% this last election. That may not sound like a lot, but when voter participation, because of all the hurdles that disabled people face to vote, and how many polling places are not ADA compliant, that's a pretty good thing.
I hadn't thought about that in terms of how being an autistic person might keep you from going to the polls.
Yeah, or any kind of disability, honestly. If a place is sensory overwhelming, and if you're in a voting booth and that's constricting, that might be bad for an autistic person. Whereas if they can vote in the comfort of their own home, that actually can benefit. But what you've seen over time is Texas's voting law had some restrictions that a lot of people with disabilities were concerned about when it came to signatures. I forget the exact details of it, but a lot of disability rights activists were concerned about that. They're concerned about Georgia's voting law. So right now, I think the focus is a lot of people are concerned about how these voting laws that a lot of Republican legislatures have passed are going to affect them. That's what I've seen a lot of. That's why Stacey Abrams' group now has a specific disability voter outreach program. That's why you've seen a lot of voter registration groups and civil rights groups focus on disability rights voting initiatives. I think the most important thing to do is do what my mom did, which is when I turned 18, she got me registered to vote. And assume that the right to vote is, again, I think a lot of times because of the high-functioning, low-functioning dichotomy and how harmful it is, we tend to think, oh, well, this person should be able to vote, but I'm not going to register this person to vote. Regardless, you should register your kid to vote whether you think that they have that right or not. And trust them with their ballot and ask them and find a way to get them to find a way to vote. And I think that's the most important thing is presuming competence. And if they don't want to vote, fine. But I think also, but presuming and starting from the baseline of how do we get them registered to vote and how do we get them to vote? And this last election was really, I read about it in this book, it was really revolutionary because you had autistic self-advocates advising presidential candidates during the Democratic primary. They advised Joe Biden, they advised Elizabeth Warren, they advised Bernie Sanders, they advised Pete Buttigieg, they advised Cory Booker. This was something we hadn't seen before because in the past it was parent advocates, advising Democratic politicians and politicians as a whole on policy. Now we're seeing autistic advocates. So I think that's the other thing, is saying that your voice is telling autistic people your voice is being heard and actively being consulted. So therefore your vote matters and it is counted. I think that's the other important thing. And I should say also, this isn't just something for Democrats. Republicans should care about this too, because if Republicans really do care about self-sufficiency, they should support ending some minimum wage labor, because that allows to say, even if Republicans don't like the minimum wage, even Madison Cawthorn has said there shouldn't be a federal minimum wage, but he also said that to say if there's going to be one, they should have it. Greg Abbott has supported ending the sub-minimum wage labor. He actually signed legislation in Texas.
And explain sub-minimum wage.
Disabled people, because of a law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, can be paid below minimum wage. So Republicans have a stake in ensuring autistic and disabled people can vote too. One of 3 openly autistic legislators, Briscoe Cain, is a Republican legislator in Texas, and he's autistic. Republicans also tend to support supported decision making instead of guardianship laws. Texas was the first state to pass supported decision making as an alternative to guardianship laws, which I think a lot of us have learned about during the Britney Spears debacle. But it's important to remember, Free Britney is a disability rights issue. And it's also an issue that I think a lot of conservatives and libertarians can and should support. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. I should mention, by the way, last Tuesday was National Voter Registration Day.
Yes, it was.
It's hard for college students in general to figure out how to register to vote in their own states when they're out of college, they don't live at home. And I think that this is a really important message to send that autistic folks need to be guided just like every other college student as to how to register to vote, how to know where to vote. And so I will promote here today, Turbo Vote is our method for getting students registered to vote and also getting notifications for your polling place. I just got a notification today about, are you sure you're registered to vote? Do you know where your polling place is? And then the University of Delaware just adopted a new platform called Issue Voter, where you can identify issues that really matter to you, like climate change or disability rights, and it will notify you what your legislators are saying and doing around those issues. Yeah. So
that's cool.
Just plugging that, I think, is some important things that the university is doing to help our students really engage.
Yeah, and if I can, piggyback off that, a lot of people say that, oh, well, disabled people, they're too incompetent to vote. People say that about students as well, but both of them deserve to have your voices heard. To say nothing of disabled students, they deserve to have their voices heard as well.
Absolutely.
And I'm in the middle of voting. I'm in the middle of moving right now, so I'm going to need to change my registration, but I'm going to, now I'm going to check out Turbo Vote in Washington. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, do we have a question from over here? I see someone in the white sweater. Thank you.
How you doing?
Hi. Hi, my name is Georgia. I was just wondering, so you were talking a lot about how this book is like advocating for people with autism and not viewing them differently. Do you feel like you yourself as are one of like the main speakers that talk on this issue that are really advocating for like people who are autistic not to be treated differently?
Yeah, I mean, I don't consider myself an advocate. I consider myself a journalist. I think that's an important distinction. I think that whenever when a person from a marginalized group starts writing about a group, as a journalist, immediately they're pegged as an advocate, and I don't see myself as an advocate. I see myself as somebody who writes about autism and who tries to include autistic people's voices in the conversation. Do I consider myself an expert? I mean, my dad does, oddly enough, but like, do I consider myself one? No. Like, but I do think that, but oddly enough, because of my visibility of working as a professional journalist, I do have the means to give a platform to autistic people. And even though I don't believe in showing my biases, but I also believe that as a journalist, I'm not necessarily biased towards autistic people, but because I'm autistic, I know who to call and I know how to include autistic voices anytime that there's a debate about autism. And conversely, anytime that I feel that there's bad coverage about autism in the media, as a journalist myself, I feel like I can call it. I can, and I often do. If you find on my Twitter page, you find that I call out bad coverage of autism in media, because I feel it's incredibly important to ensure that autistic people get the best coverage and are included in any political discussion, in any news discussion about it. So I think that that's how I do it. And it's one of the reasons why I hate those kind of inspirational stories of, oh, look, the prom queen asked the autistic person to prom. Isn't that nice? I hate those stories with a passion. And if I could get rid of one thing in news coverage, I would get rid of those kinds of stories, because they're not about autistic people. They're about making neurotypicals feel better. But, and they don't do anything to highlight the needs of autistic people. So do I consider myself an advocate? No. But do I consider myself someone who tries to include the voices of autistic people in political debates as a journalist? Yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope I was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. I think we have more time for one question over here. It looks like we got a hand up right here.
Cool. Yeah.
I hate microphones. Hi, my name is Abby. I'm a CPC intern, so thanks so much for coming and doing
Thank you for
Center
coming
for
here.
Political Communication,
Yeah.
which is the organization that sponsors all of this.
Yeah, so thanks for coming. I'm a little anxious, so forgive me.
It's okay.
But I was wondering, so I'm from North Carolina. Glad that you went to UNC.
Raise up.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like in the South, there's very much like that, like kind of bless his heart community. In Washington, it's so fast moving. Especially someone with anxiety, I also have like a bunch of, I probably took off every ring I have and put it back on 85 times.
It's okay.
So I was wondering like how you feel about, like sometimes people's attitudes is kind of like either suffer in silence or face like so much like pity and people kind of judge.
Yeah.
Like how have you kind of juggled those two things?
I mean, my feeling is that people are going to think about what they think about me either way. They're either going to say, "Oh, he's so inspiring," or they're going to say "suffer in silence," to use your words. But I think that like I can't really change what people on an individual level say. But what I can do is I can influence how the policy discussions are changed, and policy can often then influence people's public opinion and people's own personal sentiments about it. So, I can't really control how people think about me. All I can do is, as soon as, like, I was terrified when I got that book in the mail, because I was like, okay, there's no turning back from this now. It's like, okay, I'm about to send this thing out into the world. And what if people don't like it? What if people don't, But then, like, it's one of those things where you can't really control it. You can't really control how people feel, but you just have to know that you did all you can. And how people receive it is a them thing. It's not a you thing.
Thank you, Abby. I think we might have time for one more question. Maybe
Come on.
over on this side, or a Zoom question. If we have any more Zoom questions, I'm not seeing any pop up here.
Go all Pat Benatar on me and hit me with your best shot.
Or I could transition into our closing session here, which is
another Zoom question.
question. Gosh, it's like shining, like flashing at me. Another Zoom question is ready. I think that social cues and empathy must be conflated somewhat in the discussion about autism. What do you think is the reason that people conflate them?
I think it's because a lot of neurotypicals conflate them. I think that they expect, because it's a native tongue for neurotypical, so to speak, they equate the reaction of a social cue to having empathy, when a lot of times it may not register with us until much later. It may take time, or we may misread it because we have difficulty reading facial expressions or body emotion or body language or things like that. So I think that a lot of times, because because neurotypicals, those two things often go in tandem. They expect for it to go in tandem for autistic people, when really those two things they often go in tandem, but they're not the same thing. So I think that they often associate them. And what I would say is that oftentimes autistic people may not immediately, if it's subtext, they may not immediately get it, but it's okay to express how you're feeling with autistic people, because then we do care. We want to, help our friends and our loved ones and things like that. So sometimes just being explicit, saying I'm happy, or I'm sad, or I'm mad, or I'm stressed out, or things like that can go a long way. And autistic people do care. We want to be good friends and good family members and good partners and all that. So we want to do the right thing, but it just may not come fluently to us.
And that's a theme throughout your book, is just like, listen to autistic people.
Yeah.
Just listen.
Yeah, just listen. And there's a way to, a lot of people say, because one big criticism I get in my book is saying like, oh, well, it's easy for me to just ask you, but but I can't ask my kid. Well, when your kid is having a meltdown, when, an autistic person is having a meltdown, that's them communicating. That's them saying that this sensory process is too much. Or when they're stimming, they're communicating that either they're happy, or they're sad, or they're too stressed out. Stimming is still a form of communication, so you should still listen to them, even if it's not with their voice, or if it's not with verbal words.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I really appreciate your authenticity and your openness. I know this in a lot of ways was hard for you to embark on, but I think it helps our audience here in the auditorium and online to really understand, particularly adults who have autism. One thing we didn't really talk about that you spend some time in the book is sort of this kind of infantilization of...
Yeah, the idea that autistic people are perpetual children, yeah.
And white children.
White children.
White boys.
White boys, yeah. White heterosexual boys.
Yes.
It's cisgender boys.
Right, so it's much bigger than that. It affects many more people. And I have read the book, and I find it very inspiring. And for those of you in the audience, Eric was kind enough to sign some copies that you can purchase outside. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our guest speaker.
Thank you for having me. Truly an honor to be here. And thank you very much to Dr. Hoffman for inviting me. You've really made me feel welcome. All of you, the students who I've met so far, have been creative and curious and desire to make a better world. And the future is in good hands with you.
Thank you. So if you do want to purchase the book, Eric, do you want to go out in the lobby and talk?